morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here in Seoul. I just arrived yesterday evening, and in typical Korean fashion, you had me working within an hour of my arrival, we had a lovely dinner yesterday evening in preparation for this conference this morning. So it's a great honor to join with Professor Young here today, and the many distinguished guests, colleagues from Guatemala and Myanmar, my own ambassador from Ireland, Angela O'Donoghue, is here, and I'm delighted to meet with her this morning as well. It's a very challenging topic, very broad-ranging topic that you've brought for us to speak about this morning and during the course of this conference. Let's dream and challenge and create, and try to talk about the leadership of the future, the sort of leaders we need in the future. I think from my point of view, you could be entitled to say, well, you're not a leader anymore, what are you doing here? Democracy is that good way of telling you when to get out. But I think that we've all drawn experience, and certainly since the crisis and leaving politics in 2011, had an opportunity to reflect on all of that and what we had to do during that period. And the only consolation I always give myself when I look back on my political career is that after the financial crisis in 2008, every one of my colleagues in the European Union, with the exception of Chancellor Merkel, also lost their power base and had to leave politics. Some have made a bit of a return, but I decided to leave it at that. But the reason why I'm really anxious to speak about this is because a lot of people I know from Korea would be entitled to say, well, what's a small country over on the far side of the West Atlantic got to do with us? And certainly that would have been the case for many years before the modernization of both our countries. The tyranny of distance dictated a relationship which was one that was rare. But I think we all know that the technological developments and the globalization factor, and the fact that we all live in a global village now where there's immediately a lot of information, we know exactly what's going on within any part of the world within seconds, is an indication of how interactive and interdependent we all have become. And when we talk about transformational leadership, as we talk about the fourth industrial revolution and how we're going to live in the 21st century, having seen the rate of change we've seen in the last 100, 150 years, probably greater than any change we saw in the previous millennia, that indicates to us that there's a great rate of change that we're all very conscious of in our own lives, in our personal lives, in our work lives, in how we see our society developing. But we also recognize, I think, that unless there is a clear strategy, unless people can be communicated that there is a direction, that there is a sense of where we fit into all of this informatics and all of this technology and all of this trade and all of this activity that's going on around the world, unless we face into that and understand it, it's very hard for us to lead a company, to lead our family, to lead a country. So there has to be an understanding and an analysis of what is happening as a precursor to providing any sort of leadership that can be effective. And I think that the great similarity between Ireland and Korea has been this openness to international trade. As a small country, we pivoted in the late 1950s when a political leader arrived of the older generation who got his chance as Prime Minister, who looked to the prospect of European membership of the European Economic Community as a means of diversifying our markets, as a means of adding value to our primary production. We were an agrarian society at the time, primarily. And I think that Korea also has looked to the world in an effort to set out its place, that it is prepared to get out there and compete in what is a very competitive environment. But it also, of course, has relied on human capital. We didn't have much natural resources. You had the location advantage of a Singapore, you hadn't the big size of a China, you hadn't the resources of a Malaysia. But Korea found its own niche, its own position, and built on its strengths, and identified the innate ability of its own people and how it could develop those through an education system that was relevant to contemporary needs. And Ireland did the same by making some transformational changes in our education system which broadened access to education. Free secondary education came in the 1960s. There were many parts of our society before then who couldn't look to an education beyond 14 or 15 years of age. It went into semi-skilled, traditionally skilled jobs in construction and elsewhere, in farming and agriculture. So transformational leadership is about charting a bold course of action at any particular time, recognizing and understanding what the nature of the difficulty or the opportunity is, and being able to then communicate to the public what it is you want to do and getting them to come with you. And there has to be that sense of hope that there is something going to change, that there is a wider, more inclusive prosperity available to society's interests that wasn't there before. So inclusive growth is very much an important component of being able to bring our society transformationally to the next step of development, whether it's economic or social or indeed political. And to be able to do that, you need leaders who are clear and authoritative and understand exactly what's happening and why the country should go in a certain direction. And the fact that you have to have export-led growth, that we can't, we were a small country of taking both north and south, 6 million people. Unless we sell out into the world, we can't, unless we create value out in the open marketplace, we couldn't envisage the sort of prosperity that we've been able to achieve, despite the ups and downs, and I'll come to those in a moment in terms of the recent crisis. Korea itself went through the crisis in Asia in 1997, and huge changes had to take place pretty quickly in order to adapt to what was a totally new situation. Ireland similarly had to do the same, and it came through a very difficult period. But the one thing that we were able to establish is that by having export-led growth, we could have sustainable growth greater than our competitors. And that's how we built up our prosperity over the years, similar to Korea since the 70s in particular. So the similarities are this exceptional long-term growth, the reliance on exports, the success in attracting foreign direct investment, the importance of the services sector, a highly educated population, and of course focus on energy efficiency as a component in that growth. And I think it's very important that reliance on exports is understood as a key factor in prosperity. If we have an open trading system, and we hear a lot, unfortunately, at the moment about protectionist policies. Populism has become a very prominent issue in our politics in many parts of the world. In Europe, with the migration crisis, in America we're seeing it during the course of this presidential election. And we have to be voices against that. We have to stand up and say, unless we can have open trading systems, unless we have that, then smaller countries like ourselves are victims because the larger countries impose their own protectionism for their own particular purpose. And we have been lucky in that, as members of the European Union since 1973, we have been able to, under the guise of the legal rules of the treaties, been able to protect our interests and see our interests being protected by the European Commission so that competition rules and trading rules are fair for all. And we have also had the advantage as an English-speaking country, and the only English-speaking country, I suppose, that had as a member of the Euro system, the European monetary system, and the Euro currency, that's a unique selling point for Ireland in terms of its foreign direct investment policies, in creating a platform for the European single market by foreign direct investors by locating in Ireland. So that reliance on exports, and you can see how open the economy is, but over 100% of our GDP is represented by the level of exports that we provide. Attracting foreign direct investment was an absolute critical factor in economic transformation in Ireland. Because why? Since independence in 1922, right up to the 60s, there wasn't a big capital base in Ireland. There wasn't inherent wealth in the country. Prior to independence, the wealth was concentrated in the hands of a few. Subsequently, we had to establish this idea of political independence, get people to understand beyond the colonial past, and then seeing through membership of the European Union that we could diversify our markets and create more allies than just simply depending on the traditional market of the UK beside us. But we have developed our relationship with the United Kingdom bilaterally and as co-members of the European Union. And over the last 40 years, that has matured to a great extent, so that now the peace process, that started in Ireland about 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and brought an end to violence there in Northern Ireland. We've been able to work with our British counterparts to make that happen. And it's nice to know and inspiring to know that people like the Colombian peace deal I spoke to my Guatemalan colleague about last night, again, they look to the inspiration of the Northern Ireland peace process as something that could be worked on, or something that could be a template for what they're trying to achieve there, as indeed the Guatemalans themselves have had to do themselves. So political development, development of pluralist societies, open democratic values, and openness to trade. These are the sort of value systems that a society has to have in the 21st century, in my opinion, particularly smaller countries. Unless we do that, we allow the larger country the natural advantage that size and scale gives them. But it's also about promoting inclusive growth throughout the world. There are parts of the world, as we know, which require to be assisted and to be helped and developed. And it's in our interest to see it as a win-win situation, not a winner-take-all situation. The migration crisis, if you like, that's developed because of political developments and wars that have taken place in the Middle East and Libya and elsewhere, Syria. It's also because of the fact that quite apart from those decisions and those conflicts, you also have a situation where the disparity in income between North Africa, for example, and Europe is such. Why should we be surprised if I'm an Algerian or a Moroccan looking across the Straits of Gibraltar and seeing an average income for people in Spain of maybe 23,000, 24,000 euros, and I'm on 5,000 euros? Why would you be surprised that people wouldn't try and make the journey across and get a better opportunity for themselves and their families? So inclusive growth, balanced growth, sustainable growth that allows all parts of the world, all regions in the world to develop at a stage for which they are ready and capable of achieving is something that we have to insist upon as time goes on. But to come back to our own situation, in Korea and indeed in Ireland, we know that it's really about our own people, educating our own people. When you think about leadership, whether it's in the workplace or as a country, it comes back to the basics again. It's about unleashing the potential of your own company workmates, your own management team, people who are working and producing whatever it is you're producing to a high standard and to a rate and state of excellence that's sufficient to increase market share in the world and in a competitive economy and a competitive marketplace. That is the key factor. And by educating our people, we give them the ability to achieve that potential. Those areas and those societies that do not increase the critical faculties, do not make for inquiring minds, and there are parts of the world, as we know, where rota systems of learning are in fact depriving those and future generations in those countries of the chance to have decency in their human existence, to have the ability to have shelter and food, the ability to raise a family with some sense of stability and hope and aspiration for the future. And that's something that we in the West and indeed in Asia take for granted. But in many parts of the world, that is something to be achieved in the next 20 years by societies who are striving to do so. And I think it's also, if we look for our young people, because we're trying to involve, if you like, getting our young people to look at the public space as a place where they can spend part of their career too. Too often, I think, business people particularly, in my own country and I'm sure here and elsewhere, try to suggest government's job is to let us at it, let us do what we wish, let us off there on our own. And we saw where that sort of capitalism gets us. It creates banking crises, it creates financial crises. Ordinary people are the casualties of that sort of approach. What we need, of course, is proportionate regulation that understands that we live in an interdependent world, a world trading system that operates fairly for everyone, a legal system that allows us to find resolution to problems when they arise, a law-based system that's available to all. And with a highly educated population who see potential, who see the opportunities, who can analyse and critically understand what's happening, whether it's in their own particular sector, in the workplace, or what's happening societally, in terms of increasing participation of our women in society, increasing the participation of those who are marginalised in our society. How do we get people to be included in the solutions rather than exclusive solutions for the privileged few? Stability in a society that's highly educated must involve fairness, it must involve access, and it must involve equal opportunity. Without that, you put at risk the objectives you're setting yourself. And that's something that we all have to learn. We also have to learn that in an international world in which we live, that our international institutions need reforming. We cannot prepare for the 21st century on the basis of a settlement after World War II as to how we run the United Nations, for example. We need people to understand that the G7 is no longer the place where an inclusive consensus on economic policy can take place. The G20, as we all recognise, is now regarded as a more important forum. Why? Because the fact is that growth throughout the world is not the exclusive preserve of those societies who were, if you like, in the ascendant in the 40s and 50s. So the world is changing, and if people, young people especially, are to look to civic leadership as an area in which they're interested, quite apart from what they want to do in pursuing their own careers, if the public sphere is to mean anything, then we need to make sure that we provide fora for effective solutions to be found to problems. There was a greater sense, I think, in the 60s, when we looked at the global leadership structure in the world, a greater sense that we could deal with the big issues. You know, there is sufficient technology, knowledge in the world today to deal with endemic poverty. Why is it not being addressed? There is a failure to communicate on a global basis that the win-win situation for every country at whatever stage of development they're at really depends upon people having access to opportunity. When you look at what's happened on energy efficiency, that's another area, and I think the Korean people are to be congratulated for their green initiatives, because they see that as a future, as an industry. We're seeing now those countries who have seen sustainability as an important economic objective. It's not something to be taken on as a sort of an adjunct or an optional add-on. It's absolutely critical for the ability of societies or indeed industries to thrive, is that they have a sustainable growth strategy that is respectful of the environment and that understands that people want quality of life as well as money in their pocket. So that's another area where we obviously need to do a lot more work. I think one of the big issues for leadership in the 21st century are demographic factors. We know, for example, that's a big challenge here in Korea. It's a big challenge in many developed societies. Ireland is somewhat unique in the European context in that we're probably 25 or 30 years behind other societies in terms of the youth profile of our population. Over 40% of our people are under 26, 27 years of age. So that ensures that we're able to say to the international investment community, if you invest in Ireland, there will be an expanding labour force that's suitably equipped and educated to provide, if you like, the manpower and the woman power to develop your industries in Ireland as a platform, as I said, for the single market and beyond. Our dependency ratios, where we will have 4 in the workforce for every 1 pensioner, is something that we'd still have over the next 10, 15, 20 years. But beyond that, our dependency ratios will increase quite significantly. So the need for long-term planning, the need for pension provision, for getting people to save, making sure that retirement ages are going to go up. Our longevity as a people, we live longer. I think the life expectancy in Ireland has gone up by 10 years for both men and women in the last 25 years alone. That's an indication that, you know, if we're to have proper pension provision for people, we need to have policies in place that enable people to save some of their money and not consume all of their money during their income-earning years, so that there is money available for the retirement phase of their lives. And that's an issue that's being avoided by governments throughout the world today, and it needs to be addressed. So coming to, these were all the good things we did. You're entitled to then say, what happened to you 3 years ago? Well, I think, like Korea was one of the Asian tiger economies, we were known as the Celtic tiger economy. And it has to be admitted, looking back, to some complacency set in, some national hubris set in. We started to believe all our own propaganda. Not our propaganda, but we didn't see coming down the track that there were inherent weaknesses in some of our growth strategy as well. And a failure to analyse that, of course, wasn't just limited to Ireland. It was international agencies that you sometimes rely on to come in and peer review what you're doing. For example, in 2008, May 2008, the International Monetary Fund told me that our banking system was one of the best regulated around. By September, I knew exactly what that meant. Nothing. And the fact is, we didn't have a properly regulated system. We had an over-reliance on indirect taxation. The reason why we reduced our direct taxation on our lower paid was A, because we felt it was socially equitable, B, it was a way of maintaining, for as long as possible, traditional manufacturing, component manufacturing that was going on in Ireland since the 70s, to if you like, increase the longevity of that industry by keeping our labour costs down and avoiding social charges for people on low wages. It was also a way of avoiding the poverty trap and increasing employment, as we got employment down to 3 or 4%, which is practically full employment. But when 2008 came, we had a fiscal crisis and a banking crisis. And I suppose I've been asked by the organisers to talk in personal ways sometimes about what happens with leaders when you're faced with existential threats, not just the normal up and down of politics, but when you're faced with an existential threat, what's the leadership role? I think facing into an economic crisis that was the biggest since the Depression of the 1930s was an indication as to how serious things were. But it was also clear that at European Union level, we didn't have an EU-wide policy. It was up to every country to deal with their own problem. And the fact is, there wasn't much time to deal with the problem, because once post-Lehman's, within weeks, we had a situation where, because a lot of our wholesale bank lending from other parts of Europe was euro-dominated, once the liquidity went out of that market, we had people who were banks which looked like they were in good shape, suddenly, very quickly, getting into serious trouble. And we had to make a decision. The decision was made on the 29th of September. We had the central bank there. I had my Minister of Finance there, myself, some of the regulators, and it was clear that we had to make a big decision. But the big issue was not that we had to make the decision, it was the recognition that it was politically dynamite to make the decision, but it had to be made. In other words, I could see that my career wasn't going to be any greater than one term, but it was a decision that had to be made. And we made it. And people often then look at the banking system, and they're not very popular, obviously, bankers at the time or since, but you can't save an economy and kill the banking system. In a modern, commercially traded economy, the proper analogy is that the banks, if you like, are the lifeblood of the system. If the banks ain't there, you become a cadaver very quickly. So the return to growth would have been put back by decades had we not made the decisions we had to make. Being able to sell that politically against the background of growth annually of 5.5% or 6% per year for the previous 10 years, and then suddenly having a contraction of 3% in 2008, a further contraction of 7% in 2009, and at the same time making a financial adjustment of 20 billion euros when you were spending about 60 billion, both in taxes and in expenditure cuts, was clearly a policy mix that was never going to win universal acclaim, to put it mildly, but it had to be done. And the thing about leadership too is that you can't avoid decisions. There are certain decisions that mustn't be avoided. And the only consolation I had in that last few months as I was Taoiseach Prime Minister, knowing that we weren't going to make it after the next election, was a statement made by one of our founding members of our party, a man called Frank Aiken, when he said, "The party is important, but the state is paramount." And sometimes you've got to move beyond the partisan concerns of a politician and try and be the leader of a society in crisis. And that's what we had to do. And what has happened since then, in late 2010, we then had the fact that we had to get the IMF-EU 3-year deal in place, but we never compromised on maintaining a low corporate tax rate. And we also ensured that whilst we cut current expenditure during those 3 years, we also made sure we had a capital expenditure programme, rebuilding infrastructure, investing particularly in research and development and innovation. And the Irish Development Authority, which is, if you like, the state-sponsored industrial promotions agency that works throughout the world for investment to come to Ireland, you can see that the long-term strategy is right, because 7 or 8 years ago, probably 10% of the projects they got every year related to R&D and innovation. It's now 50%. So those companies who have invested in Ireland and came through the crisis with us in Ireland at the same time are reinvesting. They're reinvesting because the long-term strategy is correct. So when we had to set up a national asset management agency, for example, to take all of that bad debt out of the banks, recapitalise the banks, all of these were deeply unpopular measures because, as I say, the banks weren't exactly flavour of the month with those people who were finding themselves losing their homes and worse. But as I say, without a banking system, we can't have a modern economy at all. But by 2010, the point is that by 2010, we were back with a positive balance of payments, that we were earning our place in the world, and we were also getting from 7% decline in 2009, maybe 0.4% growth in 2010, and then increasing back up to 4 or 5% this year. And the present government, or the government before this one, are to be commended for continuing the policies that we set out, because whilst in politics there's always an indication before an election there's an easy way of getting out of difficulty, we all know, whether it's in manufacturing or whether it's in the workplace or whatever we're doing, the fact is that there's very little room to manoeuvre when there's a crisis in place. So Ireland, if you like, have come through all of that. And even at the worst of the crisis, it's important to point out that we were still had employment that was 1/3 higher than it was in 1997. So we had very fast growth, expanding labour market, employment of over 2 million people, and now thankfully we're back over that 2 million mark again in terms of employment in the economy. So the last 4 or 5 years have been extremely difficult, but they were necessary, they needed to be done, and leaders are required to look beyond their own concerns at a time of crisis. I think that's the basic point I want to make. And we are all capable of doing that, because I realised that my duty to the country at that stage wasn't my re-election. My duty to the country was to make sure that we had a country to which a government could be elected, such was the existential threat that we faced. So from my point of view, with Brexit now a big issue for everyone in the global community because of the uncertainty that it causes. The British government are clearly going to be leaving the European Union. The terms on which they leave will be difficult. The one thing we do know is that the benefits of non-membership will not exceed the benefits of membership, certainly from an EU perspective. For Britain, of course, it has allowed them to see an effective devaluation of sterling. The exchange rate is something that's going to cause us problems because the strengthening of the euro against sterling is having a serious impact on our small and medium-sized enterprises who export primarily to Britain. But I don't agree with either the doomsayers who say it's going to be terrible, or I don't agree with those who say there'll be no problem at all. Somewhere in the middle is going to be the outcome. And like everything, like Darwin said, it's not the strongest who survive, but those who adapt best. And we will all have to adapt to that new political reality that the British people have decided on. In relation to our own return to economic growth, as I say, we're back on the horse, as they say, back in the saddle, and back moving forward again. And small countries have that benefit of being able to be flexible. It's like having a flotilla out in the bay. When the wind changes, you can turn a bit quicker than a tanker, although you'll never be as big as a tanker. But at least you can move with the direction in which the wind is now blowing, and trying to make sure that you survive in choppier waters. For Korea, I think there are great grounds for optimism. The Karolinska Institute in Sweden, Hans Rosling, the director there, makes a very good point upon which I'd like to leave the Korean audience. He says, when you look at the world population, the PIN number is 1114. What does he mean by that? There's 1 billion in Europe. In Europe, there's 1 billion in the Americas, North America and South America. There's 1 billion in Africa, and there's 4 billion in Asia. If you look at 2050, the PIN number will be 1125. There'll be an extra billion in Africa and an extra billion in Asia. And what's clear is that the wealth and technology gap, which has closed over the last 20 or 30 years, means that the position of economic power is changing. It could well be that the 21st century will be the Asian century. And for that being your neighbourhood, that obviously puts you in a better position to thrive and survive than us out in the West Atlantic in a European Union that at the moment is suffering from Eurosclerosis and needs some real quality leadership to regain the initiative. But I do think that for Korea, building on its strengths, remaining open to trade, and the huge reforms that are taking place in education under Professor Hun and others, this is an example of a country that is very clearly aware of what's happening out there, the need to adapt to it, the need to bring forward reforms that will ensure that your people are best equipped to meet the new challenges, and looking to a younger generation that will increasingly have more than one career, that have 3, 4, 5, 6 careers during their lifetime, and seeing education as a lifelong learning experience with the technology changes that are coming, giving education a great opportunity to broaden its brief and to reach out far further than would have been the normal constituencies educationally that they would be looking to usually nationally. There's now an international yearning for knowledge, and for those universities who can adapt to that and create the business model, of course, for that to work, that would be the key in that respect. But overall, I think Korea has shown its strengths. And the one thing I would point out is that probably in the area of international services, when you look at the figures, given the size of your country and the size of ours, I think internationally traded services is one where Korea can move forward very quickly and indeed see it as a large component for growth in the future. Your manufacturing is way in excess of ours, obviously, and these are strengths that you'll build on in the future. So, can I thank you for having me? I hope what I've had to say has been of some relevance. I think corporate leadership, like civic leadership, like public leadership, must be based on ethics and values that command the respect and support of the population we serve, whether it's in the corporate workplace or in society generally. And if we're to look to cohesion, having cohesion in our societies, we need to make sure that our growth models are inclusive, that our regulatory systems are adequate and properly resourced, and that we have a pursuit to excellence which permeates all of what we do, whether in the commercial or the private or the public world. That's the best way in which we can see this coming together to the benefit of all our people. Ordinary people throughout the world aspire to a better time for their children than they have themselves. It's for us in leadership positions to make that not just an aspiration or a possibility, but making it real for them as well. Thanks very much indeed.
Okay, thank you for your very valuable Irish lesson to Korean economy and also the human resource development in Korea. And also, both of us just share the common elements of just like we are highly globalized economy, and also we just based on the high human resources in both countries. And also we are just preparing for the next generation and 21st century's new leadership and new human resources from now on. And I like to just ask some questions and bring out some very interesting lessons. For example, we are very globalized economy together, but in terms of the export goods, Korean economy is 5 times bigger than the island economy. But on the contrast, foreign direct investment, we receive only 1/3 of your foreign direct investment. So probably it is because of the, just like a North Korean discount or something like that. But still, in that sense, we are not that much, globalized economy, except manufacturing. So how come you just brings up some kind of a bank or financial systems liberalization is a very important measures you, after the world economic crisis, you just take. And still, we have a lot of problems of the government regulation in the financial systems or something like that. And what is your suggestion for the financial reaction to the globalized world economy? How to just increase the foreign direct investment in Korea?
Yeah, we've been reasonably successful in that area. I think, as I say, one of the reasons is because outside investment from outside Europe, looking for a location to be a platform for the single market is a major factor. Having a fiscal environment that's pro-business is certainly a factor. 12.5% corporation tax rate. That's transparent and in line with all international treaties. And also, when you talk to people about why they're reinvesting, and they're reinvesting, serious money, the PayPals and the pharmaceuticals, all the top people in pharmaceuticals, IT are all located there, not exclusively there, obviously, but they have a very strong presence in Ireland that they have. They do keep talking about the people. The quality of the people is what's dictating, because we're competing against just like Korea or Singapore, or Israel, for these sort of investments, if they're coming outside the States or wherever they're located originally. There's also the point that, international trade has changed. I mean, just-in-time production, customized products. One time in the 60s, multinationals were saying, they have a big centralized manufacturing plant, or 2 or 3 plants maybe in the States, and then ship out. They now, because of the nature of the consumer demands that are facing them, the need for customized products, the need for proper servicing of these products, subsequent after-sales products, and all that. That is something that means that investments in places like Ireland become more rational for those companies than would have been the case 20 or 30 years ago. There's also the point that the overall tonnage of goods is changing too. I mean, Greenspan made the point that there was a reduction in tonnage of goods going out of the States at one point. And he said that was really about, people are exporting computers rather than coal, is the simple way he put it. So in other words, the quality per weight of product has changed, so that the whole question of transportation costs, which were traditional cost factors in the past, given the type of product there is and the quality and value of those products now, the tyranny of distance is no longer as big a factor because of the location of plants in countries closer to those markets than would have been the case in the past, and the value of those products in any event in terms of the transportation costs not being as big a component. So when you look at the terms of international trade, when you look at all of these developments, I would still say that the main factor that I hear from people who directly invest in Ireland is its people. I'm sure it's the same in Korea, it's the same elsewhere, in whatever other area of expertise that you've developed. And that's the main reason, I think.
Okay, thank you. And probably you just mentioned that a number of elements. For example, your regional position in the EU market is a very good niche for your country, and also you just developed a very state-of-the-art technology and the human resources is very important. So you have achieved, compared to other industrialized countries, almost every year, 5%, more than 5% of the GDP increase is marvelous, among the industrialized countries. And just back to our human resources issues, you agree with me in terms of in the fourth industrial revolution, and we need to develop the better human resources in the 21st century. So the university needs to change, and also the education system needs to be changed. For example, the Albert Einstein mentioned in this way, imagination is more important than knowledge. So simply transfer knowledge is not enough. It is very good for the 20th century for the mass production and manufacturing. But in the 21st century, we need a better and much innovative, talented human resources. So what can be the a goal for the university, and what the university education needs to be changed?
Well, I agree that universities are a hugely important resource in any society. Where we teach our young and the whole esteem in which teaching is held in a society is a very important component in the quality of our education system, the quality of our teachers, the quality of people who are interested in teaching. So it's important that society gives a respect to education as a field of activity in itself, quite apart from whatever policies or resources you apply to it. You need quality people to provide a quality education. And universities now, of course, there's been a lot of this argument between the academic role of universities and, if you like, the more utilitarian concept of preparing people for the workplace. And personally, I believe in educating our people first and then developing. I spoke to a head guy in Ericsson one time who was in Ireland, and I said, who are your main guys who produce new products? And he said, it's not the guys who are the computer software scientists at all. It's not those guys. It could be a guy with a liberal arts degree, or he comes to the thing conceptually from a different point of view and from a less specific technically point of view. So that was an interesting observation. So I think, there is a great value still in a broad education for our people in the first instance, because a lot of kids, I certainly didn't know what I wanted to do at 17 or 18 years of age. I don't think many do. And the maturation process when you're 21 or 2 is a totally different thing, and you have a far better idea based on having learned in university what it is you want to do. But I think the way universities are providing greater range of choice now, where in my time, and for many people who are here maybe, you did law, or you did engineering, or you did medicine. Now you can do modules in languages and technical subjects and whatever it is you want. There's great variety and great choice. And I think that's a huge opportunity for the young generation to adapt.
Yeah, for the 20th century, we need to specialize our knowledge. There's a major, and we need to learn some knowledge from the universities. But in the 21st century, we need to change our education system to simply transfer knowledge to the students, but increase our muscles to solve the social problems and some kind of technical problems. So, as you mentioned, that not based on the majors or specific knowledges, but based on how to solve the problem, how to just cooperate with other people together, and just a innovative way. That is very important. So we need to change our education system, and also that is one thing in terms of education. And second thing is that in the university function is not only the education but also the knowledge creation. For example, research is very important. So in most cases in these days, for example, the QS evaluation, they emphasize the research. So in that case, how to collaborate with industry, how to adjust to the social change the university research and knowledge creation related to the social demands is very important. So education and research, the two functions are very important. One is knowledge transfer and create the muscles to how to solve the problem in a society for the youngsters. And second thing is that for the professor, they create the knowledge to serve the industrial demands. The 2 points are very important. And what is your,
Yes, and again, I agree. I mean, from a resource point of view and a government point of view, you need to see some applied research as well as a lot of this blue skies research. You've also got to make sure, and we did it in Ireland, where you had 5 or 6 universities competing for resources, to insist on a greater degree of collaboration. You can't have every university dealing with things as if it's a standalone entity. You just don't have the resources to do that. And so if you have a criterion in terms of eligibility for assistance or for research grants or whatever that requires 30% of the points for what level of collaboration are you undertaking, either with a university in Ireland or indeed elsewhere, so that the academic community is being interlinked and the greater use of the resources being applied as efficiently as possible. That's another way in which public policymakers can insist that if we are going to spend money in research, and we do, I think we spend about 3% of our GNP on research, you've got to be able to prepare to insist on the academic community having some discipline in what it's trying to achieve, so that the outputs can be measured and you can know what to devote more resources to where you have success and to move on to other areas where you haven't had success. So that ability to quality assure what you're doing in education is just as important as in the production line in industry or anywhere else. But I also think that, I take your point that we need to make sure that, and our young people are feeling this too, there's too much terminology about the economy in terms of human development. We need to get back to recognizing that, developing our culture, that we have a cultural industry in Ireland now based on film and on literature and all of that, so that there are people who are working, and these are industries. The film industry is a very labour-intensive industry. You can get people with many technical gifts and skills to get to work there. So again, if you set up the fiscal environment in terms of encouraging filmmakers to come to Ireland, that gives you a much larger imprint, a much larger footprint in world culture subsequently. And people associate Ireland with that sort of some successful films that have been done there. Also, in music, people like U2, Bono, all of these are cultural icons for a global generation, not just a generation at home. And again, countries must use these cultural examples as means of promoting the country, as a means of communicating for people to come, for tourists to come to Ireland, create an inquiry about the country and create an idea that here's somewhere we'd like to visit if it's producing these type of people. So getting away from the terminology of economics all the time and talking about these societal issues that will encourage tourism and cultural exchange and indeed create jobs in the economic sense as well in diverse creative industries and audiovisual visual industries and all that. That's another important footprint for a country because of the impact it has way beyond the normal markets that one would be operating in with traditional goods and services. So all of that is I think, and finally to say that, from my point of view, whilst it's got a bit of a bad name during the crisis, I'm still a great advocate of social partnership. We had 3-year rolling national programs over the last 30 years where you bring in the sectional interests, the organised sectional interests like trade unions, employers, the farm organisations, the non-government, the NGO sector and government, discussing and trying to create a consensus around where what the general direction of the country should be, what are the realistic budgetary parameters in which everyone can compete for funds, and get people to understand that obviously you can't get everything done today, and yes, you've got to set out priorities. It has to make sense to people. They have to see a sort of a holistic view of public policy to which they can subscribe. That increases participation in your democratic structures. It increases people's sense of ownership of the problems as well as the solutions. And also it creates a societal solidarity where people who are on the weaker and the margins, that there is priority given in social policy terms to bringing greater equity and equality for those people, and boosting opportunity for traditional sectors of society which have been denied it in the past. That's a hugely important political challenge. And too often this idea where populists now talk about democratic governments being elitist. You have governments in democracies as governments because they have sufficient support within their society. The elitists are often those on the margins and who take more extreme positions, who try to portray those who are democratically accountable as being elitist. And that sort of terminology is being allowed to be used in social media, in the media generally, because people like to create this confrontational idea, this sort of black and white approach to public affairs where you're either all right or all wrong. The fact of the matter is we all know life is different. Commercial life is different, and public life should be no different. So having accountable mechanisms, increasing participation of society's interests, identifying a general and national interest to which all other sectional priorities should submit itself, if you like, that creates solidarity, it creates a sense of society, and giving as much importance to, as I say, cultural activities as a means of creating jobs, as well as the more narrow, normal economic discussion. These are all important ways in getting young people to see that the public space is somewhere where we need quality people as well, and not something that's an optional extra. That sense of public service is only something that can come back when democratic institutions are seen to be working and applying rigour to their work rather than pat slogans that mean nothing to people and simply disorient people and make them feel that this is not for me, whereas citizen participation is critical.
Yeah, you just mentioned that just the 2 points. That the first one is that very creative atmosphere is needed for the youngsters, and that is one thing. And the second part is that new innovative policy measures are important. The first one is that surely in Korea we still understand the problem. We still think that education is labor and hard work and rote memorization and simply learn something and then take a test and that's it. But we need to change this kind of education system, and we need to be more innovative. As you mentioned, the film industry and the music or whatever, and they can develop their own industry and a very creative economy in the 21st century. That is very important factor. So university education needs to be changed, and we simply provide some kind of, as I said, muscles to just adapt to that kind of environmental changes, and then develop their own talent and their capacity to contribute to the new industry. That is one thing. And the second thing is that you mentioned that even the public services or the bureaucracy or government policies need to be changed, and not simply the slogan and ideology, but more practical ways. We need to be more flexible and innovative to encourage and boost up that kind of atmosphere. That is, ecosystem needs to be changed. So
yes, I think what I'd say to you is that I find in public the biggest resistors to change are often the service providers. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about change in education, teachers need to change. Teachers need to change. Students are willing to change if they get the opportunity. I mean, probably the next generation, to me, is far more open to it because they see change as being a constant in their lives. It's not careers, okay, let's have 5 or 6 careers. Let's travel if we want to travel. No, they have a different approach to life. Whereas when we were growing up in the 70s and the 80s, get a job, hold on to it. Your parents would kick you out of house and home if you came home and said, I give up a job and gone off for a 6-month sabbatical in kibbutz in Israel. Thinking you're out of your mind. It's people think differently, and the generations that have power now need to address how they exercise power to that generation. And just as the private sector has to deal with major disruptive forces that are coming in, getting people to rethink how they're going to keep in the business that look like, being very settled for the next 10 or 15 years. Suddenly, if a disruption, like what happened to the CD business or whatever, a disruption comes in from iTunes, that's it, game over. Mm-hmm. Our public services need to be as flexible, and our public bureaucracies need to recognize that you're not diluting the ethos of public service or the availability of services to the people by insisting on it being done in the most efficient and effective way possible. Yeah. I mean, that's the way private sector has to operate, and one of the dislocations between, I acknowledge, between the private sector and the public sector is private sector people get very frustrated when they see unchanging bureaucracies, when they see people not making the changes that others have to make who are out there in the marketplace, because if they don't, they go by the wayside and they have to get another career. And I think those who are committed to public service have to be open to this flexibility, to look to new models of service delivery, and not to think that the way we produced the health service in the 1960s is going to be adequate for the way you deal with a 21st century health service. It's clearly, patently can't be done. Neither can you apply the foremost technologies in medicine to every hospital in the country. You've got to find a strategic way of doing things, and you've got to bring the people with you. And that sort of, so the public debate, there's plenty of room and opportunity to have rigorous, interesting debates about how we provide basic services that are important for how people live in our society on an everyday basis, rather than reducing it, a reductionist approach to who has the best soundbite today. I mean, the media have to take on a responsibility here. And I think social media, for all its benefits, I mean, to hide behind the anonymity of some of the vitriol that you see directed at personalities and at issues in social media is very, very debilitating and very disrespectful of the public space. And I think that everyone who's interested in having a vibrant, inclusive society need to challenge these trends in whatever way they can, because it coarsens public debate. We're seeing it, in some debates. Those of us who keep an eye on politics in other parts of the world, to have a coarse, unsophisticated public debate serves nobody, only usually demagogues and people who aren't, who may not have the wider public interest at heart at the end of the day.
Okay, and thank you for your very interesting and very valuable ideas and a very positive way to look to the future. And especially the last part of it you mentioned, to know the world and to expose to the world. And I'm going to visit Ireland late November and then meet a number of university administrators, and then we can just make some kind of exchange programs, and then we bring a lot of Irish students to Korea, and we bring Korean students to Ireland, and then this kind of new innovative way is very important for the 21st century. Thanks for your valuable comments and ideas and presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you.
다시 한번 뜨거운 박수 부탁드리겠습니다.